The atmosphere within the courtroom was thick, the kind of tension you could practically taste. Everyone understood that this hearing had the power to bring everything crashing down for the sister wives' family, but no one anticipated this. The bailiff spoke. All rise. The judge appeared, gavel in hand, and all eyes turned to the man sitting at the defense table, Kody Brown. His characteristic golden boy swagger, absent. His skin was pale, his lips drawn tightly across his face, and his eyes flicked nervously toward the rear of the room. Christine, Janelle, and Meri sat together just a few feet away, something fans never thought they'd witness again. Years of tension, jealousy, and emotional wounds had previously separated them, but today they were on the same page. They shared one common goal: to go head-to-head with Kody, with the truth. Then, the doors opened. One figure walked in. A surprise witness nobody had anticipated, and the whole courtroom came to a halt. Cameras snapped, reporters wrote furiously, and even the judge looked curious. The rumblings began at once. Who is that? What are they doing here? Kody's shoulders bristled, his jaw clenched. He knew full well what was about to happen, and it terrified him. To grasp the severity of this moment, you have to rewind. Years of TV family soap had already lifted the veil on the Browns' polygamous existence, but what the television cameras didn't capture was even more chaotic. Christine had gone first, opting for freedom rather than a loveless marriage. Janelle came next, tired of being undervalued and not heard. And Meri, while she had grown distant from Kody many years earlier, had silently developed her own life, separate from the chaos. They all shared one thing, however: distrust of Kody's finances. Rumors of secret accounts, lost money, family investments no one had approved. For years the three women had lived in solitude, tending their own wounds, but a string of financial revelations reunited them. Old hurts were forgotten. This was not about who was Kody's favorite wife anymore. This was about the truth and justice. When the judge called the surprise witness to the stand, the air seemed to thicken. It was a person who had previously been within Kody's inner circle, a friend turned informant. They had documents, bank statements, and text messages ready. Christine leaned forward in her chair, hands together tightly. Janelle folded her arms, eyes fixed intently. Meri appeared to be relaxed, but her eyes didn't depart from Kody's face for an instant. Testimony began. There were clandestine deposits from joint family accounts into a private one bearing Kody's name. There were business expenses that seemed more like private indulgences. Even more incriminating, numerous payments were made after breakups had already taken place, hinting that the money was transferred without the other wives' permission or even knowledge. Every disclosure was like a blow. The gallery whispered. The judge arched an eyebrow once or twice. And Kody? He glared at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. When at last it was Kody's turn to answer, his voice was less sure than usual. He began with justifications: bad investments, misinterpreted transactions, and the assertion that it was all for the good of the family. But Christine's lawyer was not letting him off that easy. "Mr. Brown," they said sternly, "can you tell me why these funds were transferred once my client had formally broken up with you?" Silence. Kody gulped hard. The courtroom was silent. Even the scratching of pens on notepads had ceased. It was the first time most people had ever seen Kody without a response. The man who had once ruled over a household of 4 wives and 18 children now stood visibly cornered, his authority disintegrating under the pressure of irrefutable facts. After hours of questioning, testimony, and legal wrangling, the judge reappeared. Everyone leaned forward, hearts racing. The decision was unambiguous. Kody must disclose all financial records in full. He will have to pay back some money identified to have been improperly withdrawn. Regular checks on his accounts would be the requirement. The response was instantaneous. Christine breathed deeply, tears in her eyes. Janelle nodded minutely towards her lawyer. Meri did not move, but there was subtle contentment in her eyes. Kody sat still, as if the gravity of the verdict had held him frozen to his seat. The courtroom hummed with hushed gossip. For the first time in years, the power equation had changed, for good. As the three women emerged into the warm afternoon light, reporters rushed forward. Cameras flashed and microphones were waved at them. "This isn't about revenge," Christine explained to one reporter. "It's about fairness. We just wanted the truth." Janelle added, "It's time for accountability. That's all we've ever wanted." Meri simply smiled and said, "Some things were worth waiting for." Inside, Kody escaped through a side door, head lowered, careful to avoid detection. But there was no dodging the headlines already rippling like fire. Kody Brown exposed. Secret money trail uncovered. In the ensuing weeks, followers swamped social media with responses. Some came to Kody's defense, labeling it a family issue that did not belong in the court system. Others applauded the women for taking a stand against him. And then came the rumors. Whispers about additional witnesses, additional evidence, and even possible criminal investigations. If this trial had pulled back just one layer of Kody's money matters, what else could be still hiding? The future was brighter for Christine, Janelle, and Meri. They had demonstrated they could function as a unit, despite their previous differences. And perhaps, just perhaps, this was the start of a brand new chapter for all of them. A chapter where they could finally write their own narratives, without the specter of Kody's dominance. This courtroom confrontation was more than a court fight. It was the culmination of years of personal turmoil, emotional scars, and power dynamics within one of reality television's most iconic families. And as the dust settled, one thought echoed in everyone's mind. If Kody had been hiding this much, for this long, what else might still be out there, waiting to be revealed? The courtroom was not only tense, it was charged with anticipation. Every creak of the benches and rustle of papers heightened by the stifling silence. It had a faintly wooden floor polish smell, the sort of smell that clings to government buildings and makes you aware of the weight of the law before even one word is uttered. It was one of those mornings where the air itself seemed weighted, pushing down on all of them. You could almost taste the tension, that odd metallic flavor of adrenaline and fear. They had been waiting in line outside since dawn, some waiting to get a seat within, others hanging around for even a glimpse of the notorious faces soon to enter legal combat. Seated at the defense table was Kody Brown, but not the one the world believed they knew. On television he was larger than life, boisterous, confident, his every step calculated. But here, under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the courtroom, he seemed smaller in some way. His usually well-coiffed hair was just slightly disheveled, as if he hadn't had the time to get it just right. His trademark sure smile was erased, replaced with pursed lips and eyes constantly flicking towards the courtroom entrance, as if he were steeling himself for a tempest he couldn't stem. He leaned forward in his chair, elbows on the table, a plastic blue pen held tightly between his fingers. He spun it, tapped it, put it down and picked it up again. A tiny nervous habit that told more than words ever could. Occasionally he looked at his lawyer, who sat impassive beside him, ruffling through papers. And then there were the three women. Christine sat far left, wearing a crisp, dark green blazer, her dark hair swept to one side. She was not smiling, but her jaw was set in a way that shouted determination. Beside her sat Janelle, her hands folded carefully in her lap, her face serene but observant, like a hawk patrolling the skies. And finally, seat farthest in from the aisle, sat Meri. She was the epitome of calm determination, her gaze fixed on Kody with an intensity that appeared to cut right through him. The three of them sitting together was in itself astonishing. For years, their relationships had been broken, their lives shattered into disparate directions. But today, those fissures were filled, at least for this moment. Whatever personal baggage existed between them, they had left it behind. They sat here as one, and Kody recognized it. A gentle murmur ran through the room as additional onlookers entered. Journalists scribbled hasty scribbles, realigning press badges so they hung prominently around their necks. Court officials moved busily, setting out files on tables, positioning water jugs. The soft whir of fluorescent light filled the silent gaps between breaths. And then, something changed. The bailiff, a lanky man with a voice like a command bell, moved forward. "All rise." Each of the people in the room rose, the scuffling of shoes on the shiny floor resounding in harmony. The judge came in through a side door, tall, wide-shouldered, with an expression of sternness that spoke volumes in itself. I've heard it all and I'm not easily impressed. He bore a heavy folder, its edges frayed with repeated use. The folder was heavy, not in terms of weight, but of implication. Within it was the future of this case. He sat down, pushed his glasses up, and looked around the room with a slow, deliberate motion. His eyes came to Kody, rested for half a second, then went on to Christine, Janelle, and Meri. He rapped his gavel once. Crack, the sound cutting through the silence, like a lash. Before anyone could get into the swing of things, the massive wooden doors at the rear of the courtroom groaned open. It was just a small noise, but in the tense environment, it may as well have been a cannon's roar. All heads swiveled. A single figure's silhouette stood framed in the doorway. They paused for a moment, looking about the room, then moved forward. The hall light poured in behind them, creating the impression of an entrance created for maximum effect. Their shoes clicked loudly against the floor with every step, the sound unbearably loud in the dead silent room. It took a couple of seconds for faces to register, but when they did, the response was immediate. A general gasp ran through the gallery. People leaned forward, mouths agape, whispering to one another in urgent hushed tones. The newsmen's pens scribbled more quickly across their notepads. Even the judge's eyes furrowed slightly. Curiosity, surprise, perhaps even recognition. But no response was more intense than Kody's. The instant he noticed them, his shoulders braced. The pen dropped from his hand and skittered down the table, striking the edge before clattering onto the floor with a faint clink. His lips compressed into a stiff line, and his eyes, those normally calculating, assured eyes, flashed with something unbridled. Fear. Christine's eyes flickered to the figure, her face impassive but her eyes flashing with recognition. Janelle's eyebrow twitched, a silent message to anyone paying close attention that she had no idea what this was going to mean. Meri didn't twitch, but her fingers clenched on the arm of her chair slightly. The man strode down to the witness stand, each step precise, slow. This was not a person hurrying into the limelight. This was a person who knew they had power, and a person who planned on using it. And Kody, he knew them by name, because this was not any witness. This was a person who at one time had been more intimate with him than nearly anyone else. A person who had witnessed behind the veil of his public life. A person who had shared his secrets. And now that person was here to speak. The bailiff moved forward to greet them at the stand. The witness extended their right hand to be sworn in. The air in the room appeared to be holding its breath. Even the buzzing of the lights sounded subdued, as if the building itself was aware this was the moment where everything might shift. Kody swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bouncing visibly. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something in his ear, but Kody didn't react. His eyes were fixed on the witness like a man watching the fuse count down to the stick of dynamite. For so long, Kody had held all the strings. He had dictated what the public heard, what the wives understood, and what was kept from them. But now here in this courtroom, all that power was slipping from his grasp, and with each step the witness took towards the witness stand, the truth, his truth, was drawing closer to being revealed. To anyone entering the courtroom that day, utterly without context, it may have simply seemed like just another family squabble spilling into legal waters. But to those who had watched the Browns story unfold over the years, on TV, in interviews, and by quiet whispers of rumor, this was no ordinary case. This was the culmination of more than a decade's worth of story. The sister wives' household had always been outside the norm. 4 wives and 1 husband, a large network of children, duties and intersecting relationships. On television, it was done as a grand social experiment, a different family unit, with love, religion and solidarity, amidst the passing squabbles. But beneath the slick TLC shows, cracks had been creeping in for years, and eventually those cracks widened into a chasm. Christine was always the sunshine in the family, warm and friendly, quick to laugh. In the first few years, she was the glue that sometimes kept everything from falling apart when jealousy or tension surfaced among the wives. But over time, something changed. Kody's focus started to lean increasingly towards one wife in specific. Robin, the newest addition to the family. Christine attempted to brush it off initially. She reminded herself that she was thinking of things, that the disparity of time and attention was only temporary. But the more years that went by, the more apparent it became. There were vacation times when Christine and her children were quietly excluded from important moments. Private talks between Kody and Robin that were not shared with the others. Financial decisions made without consulting her. And then came the break that shattered her. It was during the pandemic, when family gatherings were a question of strict protocol and selective drop-ins. Kody had established he would not be commingling between homes to keep things to a minimum. But somewhere along the line, he still managed to spend most of his time with Robins. Christine felt the cut of not only neglect, but of being kept away from her own family. In late 2021, she revealed that she was quitting Kody. It was a shock to many fans. To Christine, it was surviving. She boxed up her life and returned to Utah, determined to begin anew. But separation from the marriage didn't equal severance of all contact. There were still joint assets, business ventures, and money issues that bound her to Kody. And that's where her own doubts started creeping up. Janelle was different, practical, business savvy, and much less emotional on the surface. She was always the one who dealt with logistics, money, schedules, and the day-to-day business of a big family. Early on, she and Kody had worked nearly as business partners. But at some point along the way, even that partnership started to disintegrate. She saw discrepancies in accounting, expenses not matching the receipts, investments no one had agreed to. But now were family decisions. Janelle's breaking point arrived not in an argument, but in a moment of realization. She no longer respected the man she'd spent years building a life with. His priorities had been turned upside down, his vows had become meaningless, and his concept of family harmony meant whatever Kody wanted, whenever Kody wanted it. When Christine exited, Janelle secretly started laying the groundwork for her own departure. By the end of 2022, she was finished. As with Christine, she began to dig through financial statements, and what she uncovered only verified what she'd suspected. Money had been flowing in illogical ways. Meri had been Kody's first wife, the one who'd been there from the start. But she had also suffered some of the most public embarrassment of the group, including the catfishing scandal that nearly broke her emotionally. For years, she hung on the fringe, keeping a friendly but distant relationship with the rest of the family. On television, she was frequently seen as reserved, even aloof, but she was far from being clueless. She observed the change in dynamics. She noticed the tensions rising, and she had her own theories about money too. Meri was in a special situation. She had nothing to lose. She and Kody's relationship had been on life support for years, something both were well aware of. But she possessed something the others did not: careful documentation. She had files, notes, and records from years ago, things most would have discarded. And when Christine and Janelle started comparing notes, Meri figured it was time to pull out her folder from the drawer. It began in small ways: a few dodgy transactions here and there, missing figures on joint accounts, checks written but never cashed, at least not where they were meant to be. But the farther down they went, the more they discovered: huge withdrawals classified as business expenses, but lacking receipts, investments in businesses that did not exist on paper, deposits to an account in Kody's name only, deposited after separations had already occurred. Initially they thought about tackling him in private, but they all knew where that would get them: deflection, excuses, perhaps even gaslighting. So they chose to go another route. They retained lawyers. They compiled evidence, and for the first time in years, they collaborated. It would be simple to reframe all this as merely a money fight, but for these women it was much more than that. Each mysterious transaction was another betrayal piled on top of years of shattered trust. Christine recalled all the times she'd fretted about how she'd pay for her children's activities, when seemingly money was flowing elsewhere. Janelle recalled how she'd trimmed spending to assist with the family budget, while Kody seemed to be spending with no restrictions. Meri recalled all those years' worth of conversations in which Kody had sermonized about transparency, a term that now seemed a bitter joke. Their mutual pain formed the basis of an unlikely union. By the early days of 2024, the proof was conclusive. Among the three of them, and with support from their legal teams, They had gathered enough to initiate a formal complaint against Kody. It was not an easy choice. Appearing in court equated to going public. It meant making public not only monetary complaints, but the family background of a clan already partially disassembled by fans for years. It meant risking criticism, backlash, and potentially losing, but also a chance at justice. And so they filed their papers. On the day of the hearing, the three women came separately, but entered the building close to each other. They didn't smile for the cameras or pose for photographs. There were no warm hellos. They just sat down. Three women, once competitors, now friends. Kody caught on. Naturally, he caught on. And although he attempted to hide it, there was a glimmer of apprehension in his eyes as he understood for the first time they were together. And he was isolated. Something that Kody did not know yet was that the most painful thwack of the day was not going to be delivered by them directly. It was going to be delivered by someone else. Someone he had never imagined would betray him. A person already heading in the direction of the witness stand. The creak of the heavy double doors opening sliced through the courtroom like a knife. For an instant nobody did anything. Even the bailiff, standing stiff at the front, appeared bemused in mid-breathe. Hallway light flooded in, outlining the figure of the person walking through. They did not hurry. Their footsteps were measured, slow, each one resonating off the shiny tile. The soft click of leather soles sounded abnormally loud in the quiet air. Reporters in the back strained to get a glimpse. A camera snapped, once, twice, and then a burst of shudders. As news photographers recognized just who had entered the room, the air relaxed like a rubber band released. And then the whispers began. "Is that, oh my God, they're here. I don't believe they're here." Kody's response was instinctive and revealing. His spine tensed, his shoulders braced, but not in confidence. In protection, his eyes fixed on the figure like a man confronting an approaching storm. Christine was the first of the wives to see them clearly. Her lips parted, not with shock, but in a grim sort of satisfaction, as if a chess piece she'd been banking on had just moved into place. Janelle's was more subtle, but her sharply indrawn breath gave her away. She recognized that this individual's arrival heralded one thing: things were going to get messy. Meri didn't even blink. Her eyes tracked the figure down the aisle, and while her expression remained impassive, her hands locked on the armrest of her chair. As the figure approached, the whispers grew more intense. This wasn't a stranger. This was Mark Ellison, a man who, until recently, had been one of Kody's most respected friends and business partners. Mark wasn't merely a friend. He'd spent time in the Browns' house. He'd been to family gatherings, a partner in business deals, and most of all, possessed information an outsider shouldn't have had access to. Something had changed though. Something had made Mark go from friend to foe. And now he stood before them, willing to testify against the man who had once referred to him as brother. Kody's lawyer hunched forward, hissing urgently. But Kody didn't react. His gaze never wavered. From Mark arrived at the witness stand. The bailiff moved up, cradling a Bible in his hand. "Raise your right hand," the bailiff told him. Mark did, his movements firm, deliberate. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "Yes," Mark said, his voice ringing clearly throughout the quiet room. He sat, patted the microphone into place, and looked briefly over at the wives' table. Christine nodded slightly, nearly so slight that Mark could not quite see it, but slight enough that Mark noticed it anyway. The interrogation started off with niceties: name, profession, relationship with the defendant. Mark responded cheerfully, outlining his long history with Kody and his participation in multiple joint ventures over the years. Then Christine's lawyer leaned forward. "Mr. Ellison, during your experience working with Mr. Brown, did you ever find out about secret financial accounts not reported to all members of his family?" Mark did not blink. "Yes," he answered directly. The gallery murmured. The judge issued a quick silence warning. But the atmosphere in the room had already changed. This would not be a vague, mushy testimony. This would be straight shooting. "Can you tell us about these accounts?" the attorney persisted. Mark started explaining a string of bank accounts in Kody's name only. accounts that had at least been partially paid for with money from joint family ventures. He cited dates, amounts, and even particular transactions. Christine sat up straight, eyes fixed on the witness. Janelle started taking notes, though nobody knew if they were for legal or just personal gratification. Mary's face remained unreadable, but her posture radiated quiet vindication. Mark reached into a leather folder and pulled out a stack of papers. He handed them to the court clerk, who distributed copies to the judge and attorneys. The crisp shuffle of paper filled the room. These, Mark stated, are duplicates of account statements and records of transactions I learned about when working with Mr. Brown. They demonstrate transfers of more than $400,000 from jointly owned business accounts to secret accounts in his exclusive control. Christine's lawyer left that for a moment before going on. And were these transfers authorized with the knowledge or consent of my clients? No, Mark responded firmly. In fact, I have emails and texts where Mr. Brown specifically tells me not to mention these accounts to anyone. Certainly not his wives. That final statement hit like a gut punch. A buzz swept through the onlookers. Louder now, before the judge quieted the courtroom with a loud rap of the gavel. So far, Kody had maintained a fairly neutral face, but now a flush spread up his neck. His jaw muscles tensed so hard that they visibly twitched. His fingers tapped on the table in brief, spasmodic bursts. His lawyer objected on grounds of hearsay, but the judge permitted the testimony, pointing out that records would speak for themselves. Mark went on, outlining how some of the money had been spent on personal expenses, luxury goods, vacations, and business meetings that seemed to be no more than vacations. Christine's lips clamped together. Janelle scribbled furiously over her notebook. Meri looked up at the gallery, where some of the family members were sitting and staring, their faces a mixture of shock and grim acknowledgement. Mark wasn't simply making unsubstantiated claims. He was meticulous. He presented timelines, quoted particular communications, and offered supporting facts. One of the most incriminating pieces of evidence was a text message from Kody to Mark that he sent only days after Christine had formally declared their breakup. It stated, "Move the funds from the Coyote Pass account. Do not let anyone else see the statements until I tell you." The courtroom was holding its breath. The message was unmistakable. Kody had moved money from a communal asset into an account that was his alone without telling the others, and had had someone conceal it. Christine blinked once, as though taking a moment to steady herself. She opened her eyes again, her eyes fixed intently on Kody. Janelle sat back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. She didn't appear angry but rather determined, as though all her suspicions that had ever existed had just been vindicated. Meri finally permitted herself the tiniest of smirks, promptly concealed behind a gulp of water. The judge leaned forward, his elbows on the bench. "Mr. Brown," he said, his tone measured but authoritative, "you will get a chance to answer to these charges, but I will tell you that any move to obstruct financial openness in this court will be taken extremely seriously." Kody nodded robotically, but his gaze stayed on the table. As the testifying slowed, Christine's lawyer posed one final question. "Mr. Ellison, in your expert opinion, were these actions taken by Mr. Brown in good faith on behalf of the family?" Mark's response was brief, but deadly. "No, they were taken for his benefit, and his benefit alone." The courtroom broke out in shouts. Voices competed with one another. Reporters yelled questions at the wives, and the bailiff had to bang for order twice before the commotion died down. But it was too late. Kody's previously untouchable reputation had just suffered a direct blow, and this was only the start. The gravity of Mark Ellison's words still lingered when the judge cleared his throat and brought the attention back to the defense. "Mr. Brown," the judge said matter-of-factly, "now it is your turn to respond to these accusations." All eyes in the room turned to Kody. The man who had once prospered under lights and microphones now seemed diminutive. His suit, although costly, seemed to drape limply on him. His confident smile that had captivated so many viewers throughout the years was not present. Nonetheless, he got up from his seat, adjusted his tie, and approached the witness stand.
The room was so silent the creak of the wood under his shoes sounded amplified. Kody lifted his right hand as the bailiff spoke the oath. "I do," he replied, although his voice was not as forceful as the one he'd become accustomed to using on reality TV. He sat, fiddled with the microphone, and instantly looked toward his lawyer. A quiet request for reassurance. The attorney nodded discreetly. But even from the gallery, it was apparent that assurance was fading. Kody quote. S. lawyer started off with soft leading questions. "Mr. Brown, how would you describe your role in the family businesses?" Kody leaned forward, speaking slowly, as if memorized. "I've always handled the finances," he started. "I did that because no one else would. It's a chore, but I've always done what I thought was in the best interest of the family." Christine, who was just feet away, shook her head ever so slightly.
The lawyer continued. "In these accounts Mr. Ellison testified about, why were they just in your name?" Cody's jaw clenched. "Because in business you sometimes need control to be able to move fast. If you've got too many people with access, it gets slow to make decisions. I was protecting our investments, not covering anything up." It was a clean reply, but it had the unmistakable tone of a man who was attempting to craft the message instead of just answering honestly. When Christine's lawyer rose, the tension in the courtroom changed in an instant. She moved to the witness stand with the deliberate pace of one who already knew every place of vulnerability. "Brown," she started, voice steady but piercing. "Isn't it also the case that these family investments of yours involved personal vacations in Hawaii, luxury car purchases, and non-business related expenditures?" Kody hesitated one beat too long. "Some of those vacations were factored out of the private accounts you told Mr. Ellison to hide," the attorney interposed smoothly. Cody's lips drew into a thin line. "Yes, but those were not shared with your wives?" She probed once more. Silence. The lawyer allowed the silence to linger, allowing the jury and audience to soak in the non-response. Christine quote. A lawyer picked up a stack of printed papers. "Tell us about these emails, Mr. Brown." In one dated March 14th, you sent to Mr. Ellison, "Move the funds from Coyote Pass. Do not let anyone see these statements until I approve." Is that your email? Kody fidgeted in his chair. "Yes, but no additional context is required, Mr. Brown. It speaks for itself." The judge disregarded Cody's attorney's objection and admitted the email into evidence. In the gallery, the sound of pens writing across notepads filled the air. Reporters were already writing their headlines. Emotional pressure mounts. The line of questioning turned to motive. Christine's lawyer created an image of a man motivated not by the desire to defend his family, but by ego, control, and self-indulgence. "Mr. Brown," she inquired, "do you consider yourself the head of this family?" "I'd say I've always been the leader, yes. And leaders lead openly, don't they?" Kody paused. "Most times." "In most situations," the lawyer echoed, his words hanging. "But not with the money." Cody's face turned a deep red. "That's not fair." "Fair?" the lawyer asked, addressing the jury. "Fair is everybody knowing where their money's at. Fair is not putting $400,000 into an account that nobody else can look at. Fair is not taking family property and making it personal indulgences while your wives don't have a clue." Christine sat unmoving, her hands together in her lap, her eyes fixed on Kody with unyielding determination. Not anger, not tears, but determination. Janelle's jaw was clenched. She had been convinced enough years before to know, but hearing it in a courtroom made it more real in a way that was both confirming and infuriating. Meri glanced occasionally toward the jury, as if to quietly ask, "Do you see now?" It was on the last 10 minutes of cross-examination that Kody crossed the line Christine's lawyer had been waiting for. "Brown," she inquired, "did you ever notify the family of the entire balance of the Coyote Pass account after transferring the funds?" Kody shook his head, then caught himself. "I mean, thank you. No further questions." It was a minor concession, but it confirmed cover-up straight out of his own mouth. The effect it had was instant. Cody's lawyer tried to do damage control, directing him towards a storyline of being misunderstood. A man who had too much responsibility, and a victim of betrayal by the people he trusted. But the damage was already done. Every time he claimed he didn't remember, or had good reason, the jury's expressions grew harder to read. And that was never a good sign for a defendant. Outside the courtroom during a short recess, the scene was chaos. News vans lined the street, commentators dissecting the testimony live. Social media feeds were flooded with clips of Mark's testimony and Kody's most damning moments on the stand. By the time court reconvened, hashtags such as #Kody exposed and #Brown family truth were going viral. As the proceedings neared conclusion, the judge spoke to both sides. Tomorrow we will proceed to final witness testimonies and make preparations for closing arguments. I remind all counsel and witnesses to be prepared. Kody rose to his feet, shoulders stiff, not looking anyone in the eye. His lawyer mouthed something, but Kody's eyes were stuck on the floor. The wives met momentarily outside the door. Not a word exchanged, but a glance that conveyed more than words ever could. For the first time in a very long time, the power of this family was not shifting in Kody's favor, and he knew it. The day of the verdict broke cloudy and dense, as if the sky itself was aware of what was to come. Hours prior to the hearing, a crowd had assembled outside the courthouse. News trucks filled the street, satellite dishes lifted high, eager to transmit the decision to millions viewing across the nation. Inside the courtroom, there was a strained enough atmosphere to asphyxiate on. A muted thrum of hushed conjecture coursed through the court. Everyone, reporters to the public spectators in the gallery, knew that following weeks of testimony, cross-examination, and bombshell revelations, today would be the day. Kody Brown sat at the defense table, his complexion wan and his face unreadable. There was no swagger, no self-assurance, no charming smile toward cameras. His eyes remained fixed on some point on the shiny wooden surface in front of him. His lawyer shuffled papers, but they both knew there was nothing left to shuffle. Christine, Janelle, and Meri occupied the front row with their attorney. For the first time in years, tension and suspicion did not stand between them. They were together, shoulders braced, prepared to learn whatever was next. All rise, the bailiff ordered, and the courtroom rose as the judge entered. Please be seated, the judge instructed, his tone flat but authoritative. The sound of clothes rustling and benches creaking occupied the quiet as people got settled. And then, the words that made Kody's shoulders clench even tighter. With a decision in the case of Brown versus Brown et al. Carefully considering all evidence introduced, witness testimony and admitted records. All the people in the room inclined forward involuntarily. The judge hesitated, making his way through his notes. Each page turned sounded like a hammer blow to Kody's heart. We have received competent testimony from financial planner Mark Ellison, who presented records proving the withdrawal of significant funds from shared accounts into accounts under the sole control of Mr. Kody Brown. The defense has contended that those withdrawals were done in the best interest of the family business and future investment. However, that word, however, cut through the air like a knife. The prosecution has demonstrated, by direct evidence and sworn admissions, that the transfers were intentionally withheld from the other wives and that the money was spent on personal matters unrelated to family business ventures. Christine's lawyer remained immobile, but her pen under the table tapped once. A low explosion of repressed tension. The judge's gaze scanned the courtroom before refocusing on his documents. This court concludes that Mr. Kody Brown did knowingly and willfully hide marital assets. Accordingly, the court decides in favor of the plaintiffs, Christine Brown, Janelle Brown, and Meri Brown, and orders the hidden money, which amounts to $427,000, to be paid back in full to a jointly managed account in 30 days. In addition, the court imposes another penalty for breach of fiduciary duty in the marriage agreement. Gasps swept the courtroom. Some belonged to journalists who already had front-page headlines. Others belonged to bystanders who had heard the family's story for years. Christine didn't smile though. She took a deep breath, her eyes fluttering rapidly to hold back tears. For her, this wasn't about money. It was validation, an affirmation that the years of question marks, gut feelings, and silent doubts had been worthwhile. She turned to Janelle and Meri, and gave each a slight nod. They had all suffered their own dose of pain in this marriage. And now, at last, the truth was no longer masked by Kody's charming TV image. Janelle quote's response was more subdued. She just leaned back, closed her eyes for an instant and breathed out. She had always been the practical one, more concerned with security than conflict. But watching Kody forced to account for his actions in a legal setting brought her a sense of peace she didn't expect. Meri's gaze stayed fixed on Kody, unflinching. If anyone in that room understood the pain of being sidelined and disregarded, it was her. For years she had accepted scraps of attention and inclusion. But today, something different felt to her. A strength that was born of standing among the others, and not standing apart from them. Kody's face went white. His lawyer leaned in close, speaking rapidly, but Kody didn't answer. His jaw was clenched, his fists balled. This wasn't how it was going to go. In his own head, his story had always been inviolable. He was the leader, the protector, the expert. Now, in minutes, that picture had been professionally taken apart. The judge wasn't done. Besides the restitution and fines, the court directs that all subsequent business transactions with the family name or image must be done with complete financial disclosure with equal access provided to all parties concerned. This is to prevent such a violation from happening again. The gavel came down once, sharp and final. Court is adjourned. Reporters charged forward, shouting questions. Cameras popped. The wives stood up, their lawyers moving in as a shield to shepherd them toward the door. Kody sat frozen for an extra moment, his eyes fixed on the table before him. The sounds around him were muffled, far away. His world, his carefully controlled world, had just been shoved open for all to view. In the hallway, the media was merciless. Christine, what do you think about the verdict? Janelle, will this alter your relationship with Kody? Meri, do you see any chance of reconciliation? Christine paused, her tone firm. This is not about revenge, it's about fairness and truth. And today, we received both. Janelle just added, it's over. That's all that counts. Meri didn't utter a word, but her silence was deafening. Within minutes of exiting the courthouse, excerpts of the verdict filled the internet. Hashtags such as #CodyCrumble, #SisterWivesJustice, and #BrownVerdict trended on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Fan accounts analyzed each detail, from Kody's face when the judge announced the decision to the manner in which Christine put a hand on Janelle's back in unspoken support. Podcasts and YouTube shows went on the air immediately, dissecting what it meant to the Sister Wives franchise, the future of the family, and the court of public opinion. Only much later, when the gawkers in the crowd outside had dispersed, did Kody appear outside a side door, accompanied by his lawyer. No cameras officially were permitted in that section, but one enterprising photographer managed to snap a blurry picture of him walking with head down, hands deep in pockets, his shoulders slouched. The photo went viral on the internet, a far cry from the smiling, confident patriarch audiences used to see. Before they went their separate ways, the three women had one final moment in the parking lot. Christine's voice was soft, as if she didn't want the moment to be over. We may never be what we used to be, but today, we stood united. Janelle smiled weakly. And we won. Meri did not smile, but her eyes relaxed. That's enough. They embraced. Briefly but long enough to cement the moment in their memories. Then they parted, each aware that though the war in court was won, the process of healing emotionally would just start. That evening, news hosts throughout the nation made it their headline. The ruling didn't only end a courtroom fight, it broke a decades-old public persona, and provided a fresh opinion for millions of viewers about a family they felt they knew so well. And off in the background, browsing through the mess on the internet, Kody Brown saw the headlines, the hashtags and the pictures, and understood that the court decision was just the tip of the iceberg of his comeuppance.